Hi, my name is Etienne. I'm going to take you through our journey into VueJS. I guess we all started somewhere. I had humble beginnings. I've always worked on web applications. As a developer, Mood Tools had me tweening and rotating things to make fancy gallery components and plugins for custom CMS tools. Prototype had me writing my first object that wasn't vanilla JavaScript. I used Prototype's API to get dimensions of images for yet another gallery plugin, this time at a different company for another content management system. We try and keep code in modules and components for a lot of good reasons. To touch on a few of them, it separates the concerns really well. It reads easier. Changing things become as simple as opening a file, and you know that by editing the stuff inside that you're not going to affect really much of a different system. Services are in one place, DOM manipulations in another, controllers taking ownership of things, and your folder structure mimicking that. So everybody really wins. I think there has been a lot of books written around clean code and separating concerns and domain logic. I'm sure everybody has been brought up to speed in a recent pull request about how important something like the single responsibility rule is. So I won't go too deep into that right now. The point I'm trying to make is that server-side application code has always been well defined and architected. At least at the companies I've worked at, front-end technologies have always been tagged on top of projects almost as an afterthought, with little consideration for the intricacies of cross-browser compatibility and more recently device performance, especially on lower-end devices with bad internet. Yes, that is an actual quote. Personally, in the last 10 years, I've never found anything in the JavaScript space that quite felt right for me personally. Don't get me wrong, it got the job done. I mean, some better than others. Some, I mean, libraries, frameworks, sets of tools bunched together in a certain way to accomplish a goal. I mean, you get your jQueries and your Angulars, and I've worked on all of them, and they were great at the time. Building real-time web dashboards make you realize very quickly that 50 set timeouts in nested event listeners bubble up, posits, and points become a pain. Real pain to debug, and there will be race conditions and you will not be able to test them all, so you end up testing in production, which is probably bad. Did you guys know that JavaScript's turning 22 this year? So let's give it a hip hip hooray. Sorry, dad joke. Another cool factoid that I never knew about was JavaScript was initially called Mocha, like the test framework, and then LiveScript. The word Java replaced Live and LiveScript because it became a trademark of Sun. They own Java, so they used JavaScript as a marketing move, I guess. And it was coded by Brandon Ike in like 10 days. So that must have been a very interesting time. So let's get to Vue, right? The creator of Vue.js is called Evan You. He created this library to solve his own niggles working at Google with how JavaScript renders things. The original name of it was called Seed, but he renamed it to Vue because the name was open on the NPM site. So yeah, Googling for your project's name before it exists, right? The first stable and public release was in February 2014, after it had gathered some traction in the Laravel community. And in Asia, by the big three companies, Alibaba, Baidu, and Tencent are really the big drivers of the Eastern adoption of Vue.js. I guess comparing it to React, which in my mind would be the closest kind of library that handles, well, the UI part of things, the West has adopted React a lot quicker, because of Facebook and how that drives it, so it's quite an interesting comparison. A couple of days ago, a new version released, so I implore you guys to check it out. It's a lot of work has gone into the server-side rendering of things, code splitting, which is quite interesting. Excuse me. Code splitting is traditionally super hard, so it's cool to see. I haven't checked it out yet, but it's cool to see guys actually spending some work on it. Because they do believe in the power of caching stuff, but they also like coding stuff in JavaScript, so it's kind of a win-win. Vue.js started out as a view layer library, where you drop in a single file into your page and start coding. But like any good application and development, excuse me, development project, it turns out we need more than just the display. So Vue kind of evolved. VueJS is a progressive framework for building user interfaces. That's what the core is around, declarative rendering of UI elements. Unlike monolithic frameworks, Vue was designed to be incrementally adoptable, meaning that the core library is focused on the Vue layer only, and you pull in modules of complexity as you scale outwards. If you look at front-end development as layers of different feature sets with corresponding sets of complexity, your projects are going to increase in complexity as you build them out. So you do need different solutions. The web is a diverse place, and there are many problems you and your team are going to solve. Sometimes you just need a simple drop-in to render components on your web page. Sometimes you will have to manage application state across the whole app. It all depends on how you go about it, and there are as many things as you can build as there are people in the world. This makes things a bit hard when deciding on a front-end feature set, because you get locked into certain ways of solving problems that might not be intended for your specific solution or outcome. Vue is not something that blocks you from developing what works for your team. That is an example of a single file Vue component. Now, before you freak out, there are many benefits to the separation of concern here. Where traditionally we had the separation of concern as horizontals, where CSS would be split from JavaScript, would be split from HTML, which is good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. In many Vue projects, global components will be defined using Vue.component, followed by the new Vue constructor to target a container element in the body of a page. This can work very well for small, I guess, to medium-sized projects where JavaScript is only used to enhance certain things. In more complex projects, however, where your front end is entirely driven by state, the disadvantages become apparent. Global definitions force unique names for every component, so you might end up having component.component.component.component. String templates lack syntax highlighting. If you do HTML inside of JavaScript, it's kind of hard to quickly type out some stuff because of the backslashes and all of those things. No CSS support means that while HTML and JavaScript are modularized into into components, CSS is kind of left out to the side. I mean, there are a pretty good kind of argument for keeping your Sass in modules that's different. So, yeah. Also, having no build step restricts us to HTML and ES5 JavaScript, rather than using preprocessors and what was mentioned earlier, the greatness of how easily ES6 and those things write. All of these are solved by single file Vue components that take the separation of concerns from a horizontal to be a vertical now. Whereas if you know you're changing your hello component, it'll propagate across your whole app. And you can still test something in isolation, which for me is a really good benefit. Recently there was a full-on roll in the PHP community about a project that didn't follow the community standards that well, around code styles and structures and what the community has called PSR, which is kind of the accepted standard across the industry. This was a super experimental project, and it turned out to be a nightmare for its creators because they decided to challenge the conventional wisdom and make something that is different, diverse, which solves a very specific set of problems, mainly readability and cognitive debt, or visual debt that they call it. Everything in a file and everything in a class that you read is a visual overhead that you have to kind of grok before you start even typing or changing something. So they wanted to play with the idea of lessening everything, removing type hinting. Don't chastise me for that. But they removed type hinting, they removed the PSR standards completely, and they messed around with how cool it is. And surprisingly, it reads a hell of a lot easier. The conversations and rants are very interesting if you're into that kind of thing. But I'm not going to try and sell you another JavaScript framework because it's awesome. Diversity is one of the only ways our industry will keep growing and include more people of all backgrounds and empower many ways to solve problems. I mean, Ruan talked about it a lot, that the diversity magic is what drives a lot of the creative problem solving. And that for me is the magic of it. We are spoiled for choice, and that's exactly why software is eating the world. So embrace it, play with it, and take one that works for your team and your use case. The only framework you need to succeed can be found in the very nature of being a human being. Full disclosure, we don't have any Vue in production yet. Just to get that out there. But we are working to in the short term. We do, however, have a very interesting architecture where we use PubSub to pipe all of our applications and systems events to. With everything of us running in Kubernetes, which is a orchestrator for Docker containers across multiple nodes in the cloud. Events are a concise way of describing actions that happen in our system. Currently we use JSON schema to validate the expected data, but what kind of ties into Peter's talk a lot is the fact that we have to use HTTP to kind of communicate between not necessarily microservices, but we slice out bigger parts of our system that make sense to go together, to change together. So this makes listening for events in multiple places very easy. Now I'm going to get to my point around Vue just now. But you can easily build a Vue component that directly consumes data from an event stream by applying or subscribing to a specific channel. And not having to work to get the transactional endpoint running with probably a query that has 7 joins because everything needs to be relationally perfect, right? Inside of a single request. So this takes out the onus of the component to actually know about its data, whereas it can consume an endpoint, or actually, sorry, not an endpoint, it can consume a channel with the data, and it literally updates itself based on the data that comes back. We are looking at protobufs, by the way, to talk to internal services, so it's very interesting. Components can live in isolation and emit their own Vue events to update state across multiple entire user interfaces. Vue is flexible in how you pull in components outside of the scope of the core library, and it makes swapping out Vuex, which is the state management that rolls with Vue, for something like Redux, which you're probably already using. It's a trivial thing. We've done it before in a Hack Day project, and it's quite cool. So talking about flexibility, we have the ability to share components from a style guide that our front-end team maintains to the entire bigger, we have multiple teams inside of a bigger team. It's a project that contains a collection of our front-end components for pixel pushing and sign-off. I mean, e-commerce space is a bit more rigorous around how it signs off things. But what's been serving us really well there is we can define and build our Vue components that's going to get used in production completely in isolation, and probably with Kubernetes spin up at just a staging environment somewhere that any product team can go and look at and play with and make notes and all of those cool things. And then it gets shared into a production build. So what's also cool about it is it rolls with any kind of JavaScript library that you currently have. Everything we have now is built in jQuery and vanilla.js, components using handlebars, and jQuery in our web guide. So transitioning into Vue-based components seems simple enough. I saw you use Jade as a templating language. Out of the box, it supports a whole lot of them, but handlebars is kind of what we decided to go with, because we use it in Android also, which is kind of cool. So the cool thing about that is now you're sharing components between teammates, and the parent component that has children components in them only needs to send down the correct properties, and the children needs to communicate with the parent only by events, which is then again getting piped back to our PubSub event stream. So we have really good visibility on what our users are actually busy with. Clicked on this button, opened this thing, looked at this picture in this gallery. It's quite powerful. So that is a list of the various Vue builds, I guess. But the one I want to lift out to you is the production minified and gzip runtime version of Vue core, which is literally just the declarative rendering part and the components is like 28 kilobytes. So that makes dropping it into like any production app pretty non-trivial when you decide, okay, I want to change this button to a Vue component that actually connects to a service or something. We've done it before, and it's working really great. So next thing I want to touch on is the fact that every Thursday, or every second Thursday, we have a full hack day where everybody on the team just plays around with things. And that's kind of where we discovered Vue. We're predominantly a Python and a PHP Laravel house. So traditionally, none of us came from a pure JavaScript background. Yeah, we use Node and Express for our WebSockets, but we're not really good at it yet. And I think like to come into Vue with its simple API has been allowing us to do a lot of cool things with it. What's also cool is VueJS supports testing or unit testing out the box with familiar testing libraries like Mocha and Jest. It has modules for client-side routing, immutable data, state management, server-side rendering up until recently, or from recently, sorry. Native mobile development, which also came from the Alibaba guys, I think. Many UI libraries and ready-made components. I'll share a list of my resources in the next slide. The community is pretty friendly, and I guess for me to say you'll only experience the simplicity of the Vue API if you actually build something yourself. So that's a link. I encourage you to just go there at some point if you're looking for any VueJS resources. Add to it if you find something cool that's not on there. You're more than welcome. I'm going to do my intro last. So my name is Etienne Marais. I work for superbus.com as a web developer in Cape Town. We are hiring on all dev roles at the moment. I'm the team lead of the customer experience team, and we're responsible for all the post-conversion parts of the business. So every time someone buys, that's where our journey starts. Outbound deliveries, customer experience as a whole, or even returning stuff. I love coding for the web, and I love solving problems with tech. So join me and let's talk about VueJS. Thanks. All right, so Simon told me about some stuff. I have no idea what a tower license is, but the best question will get it. Any questions? Sorry. Yes?
What is Vue giving you that you were missing out? The simplicity or what?
Yes, I would say for me it's the simplicity in the API. The application lifecycle of Vue is a lot less than React, so there's a lot less hooks that needs to run in order, so it makes debugging a hell of a lot simpler. Also, the fact that you can swap out things. You don't have to use the Vue's filtering system because you can roll your own. It's a nice way, yeah, for me it's a simplicity, I think. Yep, you can. Because the Vue object exposes itself, you can tie into any component, they're all named. So you can specify that you want to pass this component this data and expect this to be returned, which is very nice. We tried using Jest, Jest, and we tried using Mocha and Ava actually, which is also something pretty cool. So yeah, play around with it. Yeah. Yes, what's up?
You mentioned building components vertically instead of horizontally. You also mentioned that you guys run Kubernetes. So
Not really a microservices architecture on Kubernetes. We have a services architecture on Kubernetes. So it's not really services with one or two endpoints. They've got multiple, but we still have a bit of a monolithic stack. And what we did is we identified places where stuff makes sense to go together. So everything around how you search for products on the site, that can be a service, because sometimes our search service falls over. I probably shouldn't say this, but then we fall back to our own as a fire prevention thing.
would you say the more vertical development of a component comes faster?
That's a hard question. Not really, because they're not entirely related. But if you think in terms of the front end, I guess you can start tying components to like specific services. Now we're listening for events on channels, so yes, actually, yeah, okay, it does. Sorry for the workaround. Yeah. Yes, what's up? Yeah, so we currently, just a bit of a backstory, we run on a front end that's completely separate. We almost, well, the built our own kind of set of things that has our CI in, so all the buttons look the same. It's like a minified version of a bootstrap, if I could explain it like that. What's cool about that is because stuff's already kind of in components, but they use jQuery in the back and HTML/mustache in the front. We could take something like all of the buttons on the site, which some of them are Ajax buttons and some are not. So some of them has a page redirect and some has just the Ajax call to the API. What we can do is legitly just drop in the Vue core runtime and replace the button code with the actual component, give it the correct data, and it should just fly. We've tested it in a hack day, and it's been working really well for us. So we're gonna do like small things that make sense, like an image gallery you can roll on its own, stuff like a navigation you can roll on its own. So trying to think of the way we do services in the background also kind of complements the way that we think about how stuff should live on the front end. So a title, for instance, doesn't make sense to have its own component, except if you're doing some weird stuff with it. But like a whole page might be a component, or the way you add addresses for deliveries and those types of things. So it facilitates quite interesting conversations around what we see as this needs to go together. We do believe in that. I'm not sure whose law it is, but stuff that needs to, and I'm paraphrasing, stuff that needs to change together needs to go together, which kind of works well for us. That's a good question. Probably, because like I said, having a diverse tech stack is kind of magic, and it allows for a lot of cool things. Like we're not forcing a language paradigm on any set of problems we solve. We tried doing WebSockets with PHP and it just didn't work. So we went over to Node, and it really scaled pretty well for us. So it's about applying the right kind of hammer for your nail, if I can say it like that. Also, like, we try and not think about having a hammer and then everything looks like a nail, right? So, yeah, no, definitely, dude. Come to it. All right, I think I have time for like 2 more questions. All right, that's cool. Yes, we have. I think we kind of do a drop-in kind of replacement of the internal Vue event bus. It's also a way for the child components to speak quite nicely to their parents without affecting the state of stuff. So the state is like different than like things that are happening, things that needs to update. But also like tying into the let's say on something happening, we can directly pipe that to our event stream. And all of a sudden our front-end components are now aware of stuff that are happening, which is, that's how we plan to use it still, like I said.